Welcome to our final week of devotions using the book The Passion of Jesus Christ by John Piper. Today is March 25th and we're on devotion number 25, where we see that Christ suffered and died to become for us the place where we meet God. This devotion really touches on one of the most misunderstood things about Jesus during his ministry, which still lingers to this day. It's about the physical place where God meets mankind. The passage for today is from John chapter 2, verses 19 to 21, where Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. This prediction by Jesus in John chapter 2 is one of the first times that he talked about having to suffer and die in Jerusalem, even though it didn't sound like that on the surface. Obviously, the Jewish people that Jesus was talking to misunderstood what he was getting at here, that he wasn't talking about destroying the physical temple building, but that he was referring to his body as the temple of God. And through his death, his body would be destroyed, but it would be raised again in 3 days. In fact, this very prediction by Jesus in John chapter 2 was used against him by the Pharisees at his trial as evidence that he was a conspirator of some sort that was seeking to demolish the status quo of the time. But even up to that very point, they forgot that what Jesus was really getting at here through this message, and that was that his body would be the temple of God. You know, you think about the temple and how important it was in the Old Testament to the religious practices of God's people. What made it important was that it was the meeting place between God and mankind. It was the place where God came down to mankind with his words and with his blessings of grace and forgiveness, much like our churches are today. But it was also the place where the people of Israel would offer their sacrifices for their sins as a picture of what God's coming Son would do eventually. It was also the place where the people's prayers rose up to God. It was the meeting place between God and men. And what Jesus is saying by referring to the temple as his body was not just that he would offer it up for the sins of the people, but that he would become the new meeting place between God and men. It would no longer be about a physical location. There would no longer be a singular temple. In fact, part of Jesus' prediction too during his ministry was that this literal temple building would be destroyed by the Romans long after, or after he had gone up to heaven. And so this is very important for us to understand today as well, that the special nature of our relationship with God, or the idea of the sacred, is not bound up into one specific location. Piper does a very good job of making that point clear, that unlike the Islamic faith, unlike Judaism, Christianity has no geographical center. Some people think it's the Vatican City in Rome where the Pope resides and where the head of the Roman Catholic Church is, but they don't speak for all of Christianity. Christianity has no specific holy place in geographical terms because Jesus has assumed that role already. Piper does a really nice job of describing that in the second paragraph, where he says, Christ himself would become the final Passover lamb, the final priest, the final temple. They would all pass away, and he would remain. That's such a fitting illustration where we talk about, during Lent, Jesus as the sacrifice, but also as the priest to offer the sacrifice. Well, he's also the temple. He's also the meeting place between God and men. And I think that really comes out clearest in something that Piper doesn't even mention, and that's the Word of God. In John chapter 1, Jesus called himself the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the Word made flesh. That is where we meet him. You know, Piper talks about how Jesus is as close to us as faith is, that we don't have to go any particular location to get him, but he leaves the reader wondering how. And he doesn't bring in the concept that Jesus comes to us through his Word now. His Word is the meeting place between God and men, because Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the Word made flesh. And so there's a fitting picture here of Jesus as the temple in sacrificial terms, as the offering that took place upon God's altar of justice to atone for the sins of the world. But there's also a fitting reminder of Jesus as the temple in terms of how our relationship with God continues today. And that's through using the Word of God, law and gospel, the Word as it comes to us in written and spoken ways, and also through the sacraments. May God continue to encourage each of us this week through a regular use of His Word with full confidence that Jesus is coming to us through that Word.